Oregon, a desolate farmhouse surrounded by whispers of chaos and survival. In Siege, it's known either as a highly recognizable and competitive map, or a polished turd when compared to its old version. But beneath the surface, there lies a story waiting to be uncovered. What inspired this iconic map? How does its design tie into the lore of Rainbow Six Siege, and what real-world influences shaped its creation? From its haunting aesthetic to the tactical characteristic it presents, Oregon is more than just a map. It's a glimpse into a world where order clashes with chaos. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the lore behind this iconic map, and uncovering the real-life stories that brought it to life. So make sure you grab a snack, pickler, because this is the real-life and in-game story of the iconic map, Oregon. Oregon is a map that takes place in a fortified religious or cult-like compound in Redmond, Oregon. The map features a single site on both the top floor and the basement of the map, in which both sites take up the majority of the floor that their respective A and B bombs are on. The main floor of Oregon is quite large relative to the second floor and basement levels of the map. Due to the larger nature of the first floor on this map, there can be two sites found in 3 of the larger rooms, those rooms being the meeting hall, the kitchen, and the dining hall. At first glance, all Oregon seems to be is a manor that is used by a tender of the farmland and grain silos that border the map itself. But upon closer inspection of the features of this map, we can notice that certain details point towards a much deeper rabbit hole in the game's lore and real life. Before I get into my theories for the map's role in the Rainbow Six Siege story, let's get into the real life story and similarities to the map inspired by it. In 1993, a real life siege was conducted by the FBI at the Mount Carmel Center in Waco, Texas. Immediately, you will notice that the main building in Oregon has an extremely similar roof to the Mount Carmel Center, and even has the same construction site as the real life version. The Mount Carmel Center was turned into a compound by the Branch Davidians, a doomsday religious group, prior to the siege. Now, based on the religious group's violent end, I bet it wouldn't surprise you that the siege was not the first time the cult had a run-in with the law. In fact, most of the cult's trouble with the law started with the leader of the Davidians prior to David Koresh, who was George Roden. At the time of Roden's leadership, Koresh's name was Vernon Howell, which he later changed after assuming leadership of the group. Anyways, after the death of Benjamin Roden, the original founder of the Branch Davidians, there was a void in the leadership role of the cult. The first option for the next leader was George Roden, Benjamin Roden's son, and Vernon Howell, who was favored by George's mom because she believed her son was unfit to lead the group. Roden's mother also had an affair with Howell, which led to Roden developing a deep resentment towards Howell.
Well, off to visit your mother!
This led to a meeting in 1984 where the group split under Howell and George due to different ideologies of who the fit prophet was. This ultimately led George to running Howell's group off the property at gunpoint and assuming control of the Mount Carmel Center. After this point, he renamed the Mount Carmel Center to Rodenville in order to make the property his own. Later in 1986, Howell attempted to take back the Mount Carmel Center by force, which then resulted in a long dragged-out lawsuit because George had attempted to challenge Howell to a resurrection contest by digging up the casket of a Davidian woman, which Howell then attempted to use against George in court. This ultimately led to George being jailed for 6 months due to foul language used in his court pleadings, where apparently he threatened the Texas court with sexually transmitted diseases if they ruled in Howell's favor. He also was jailed an additional 90 days after this sentence when he returned to the Mount Carmel Center property after being ordered by the court to stay off the property. Then in 1989, George Roden was found guilty of murdering a Davidian by the name of Wayman Dale Adair, in which George had murdered Adair with an axe because Adair believed he was more of a fit messiah than George. George was convicted under an insanity defense and was committed to a mental hospital. Luckily for Howell, this was the chance he was waiting for to finally take control of the Mount Carmel property. He aided in this scheme by paying off all the taxes George owed to the property, which gave him legal control of the Mount Carmel property. Once Howell controlled the property, he began to enact a vision he believed was sent to him by God, where he would fornicate with the women of the group to create an army for God. By 1990, Howell had assumed complete leadership of the Branch Davidians, at which point he changed his name to David Koresh. This led to the Davidians developing beliefs that their leader, David Koresh, was a prophet sent by God to prepare them for the soon-to-come apocalypse. He led them through his own interpretations of the Book of Revelations, and prophesied that the armies of Babylon would destroy the world while they survived until Jesus returned to judge them. Following the words of Koresh, the Davidians began fortifying the Mount Carmel Center and mass stockpiling weapons in order to survive the end of the world. We can clearly see this translated into the map, as there is an army on the second floor with a few defense setups. This also caused the Davidians to live an isolated lifestyle, cut off from the rest of the world. We can see this in-game throughout various rooms, dedicated to providing the cult's needs, like a kitchen, dining hall, a big chapel-like meeting hall, and living quarters for the adult and children group members. Because the Davidians believed the end times were soon to be, they saw no point in venturing out of the compound, as they believed this was their last safe haven. It even led to them beginning construction on new apartments for the large growing families within the cult. A few days prior to the siege, a local news outlet in Waco released a series of articles describing allegations against Koresh, stating that he had committed multiple acts of sexual abuse against women and underage members in the community. On top of this, a local UPS driver had notified the authorities of a box of grenades being delivered to the group, after the driver accidentally broke open the box and saw the grenades. After this, the group was further investigated and it was discovered that there had been transactions between an arms dealer and the group for at least several months prior. However, this was most likely due to a man in the group having a firearms manufacturing license, in which David also openly stated in the past that they were big on shooting and even had a firing range on the property. However, the ATF was concerned that they were not paying taxes on their black powder explosives and illegally manufactured firearms, which led to further investigation. At this point, the ATF Association decided that a warrant was necessary in order to investigate the unregistered firearms and the reported allegations of child abuse inside the cult. However, later on we'll see that these allegations don't particularly make sense for the ATF or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to be investigating in the first place. The siege was planned by the ATF and local law enforcement for the 20th of February 1993, with the codename for the operation being Showtime. However, before the raid, a news reporter who had been tipped off on the raid was asking a mailman for directions to the Mount Carmel Center to get a scoop. However, he unknowingly informed David Koresh's brother-in-law, who was the mailman, which then led to his in-law informing Koresh that a raid from law enforcement was imminent. A counterintelligence agent from the ATF reported that before he left the Mount Carmel Center before the raid, all of the Branch Davidians residing at the center began to pray and prepare for the incoming siege from the SWAT and ATF. This led to Koresh having the means necessary to prepare his forces for a defense against the siege. On the morning of the 28th of February, the SWAT and ATF vehicles began to surround and set up at the front door of the Mount Carmel Center. Koresh would come out from behind the door with his hands up, begging the law enforcement to put their guns down because there were women and children inside the building. However, at some point during this heated interaction, a member of the law enforcement was spooked or misinformed, and popped off the first shot at the Branch Davidians. This was the beginning of a brutal 51-day-long siege on the compound that resulted in 54 casualties before the climax of the tragedy. On April 19th, a final drastic measure would be taken by the FBI by deploying CS tear gas into the building via holes made with tank barrels to make a way in. This resulted with the male Davidians equipping and arming with gas masks while the women and children were moved to a bunker below the building. However, around 6 hours after the gas had been deployed, a fire broke out in the building and quickly engulfed the whole building in minutes. This is because the aerosol component of CS tear gas used at Waco was methylene chloride, which is very flammable. This resulted in 9 members escaping the burning building, but 82 men, women, and 32 of the people being children died to the fire, asphyxiation, or to the burnt chemicals from the CS gas that resembles cyanide. So pretty much by far the worst, most excruciating way one could be killed by. As for Koresh, he was killed in a suicide pact by his assistant Steven Schneider, who shot Koresh in the head and then did the same to himself before the fire could engulf them. The siege clearly became out of control for the FBI and is remembered as one of the most brutal sieges conducted by the FBI alongside Ruby Ridge. Ironically though, it's believed that the ATF's initial intentions for even messing with the cult was in order to better their public image after the tragedy at Ruby Ridge, which I won't get into too much in this video, but it went very similarly to the Waco siege. The loss of this many lives could have been avoided if the FBI had waited for Koresh to finish a manuscript he was working on, detailing his interpretation of the Book of Revelation. or to be more specific, his interpretation of the Seven Seals of Judgment unleashed at the end of the world. But the FBI grew impatient at Koresh's previous actions and did not give him the time he requested to write his manuscript. While the real-life story of this map describes what happens when two groups lead to tragedy over moral conflict, my theory for Oregon's role in the major siege story entails similar themes to the ends a group will go to fulfill their mission. Except in Siege, the group living on the Oregon map had their focus on a global level, rather than the Davidians' focus on self-preservation. In order to begin uncovering this, we need to find out what the Oregon group was preparing for by examining the rooms around the map. One item you will find often placed throughout the map is a calendar in the month of April, with 2 dates emphasized on them. The most obvious date being ED on the 14th of April, along with T-Bomb Sweeping Day on the 5th. But going back to the 14th of April, there are 2 theories made by players for what ED could mean on the calendar. One theory suggests that it was a release date for the game when this was discovered before the game came out. However, this was later debunked when the game was to be pushed back to December later that year. The other theory, and the one I'm going to run with, is that it is an abbreviation for End Day. I believe that this makes the most sense due to the similarities to the Davidians' belief of a soon-to-come apocalypse. However, we will soon discover that the Oregon group was not just preparing for an end to time, but something much more malevolent on a broader scale. If you head down to the laundry room in the basement, you will notice an anomaly among the other laundry. There are folded up German police uniforms along with many bottles of bleach present in the laundry room. This is very strange, as in the current version of the map, there is nothing else related to the group having a use for police uniforms. But if we go back to the old unreworked version of Oregon, we can find a potential reason for these uniforms. Aside from maintaining a self-sustaining headquarters for the group to use, the group seemingly had plans to enact an attack on specific locations around the globe. If you took a closer look at the whiteboard being presented in the meeting hall of Old Oregon, you can find that there was a layout of the first floor of the old Hereford base with arrows and names of key positions being planned on the whiteboard, along with the same text, 87 days. Hereford base being referenced is very strange because in the current version of the game, the Hereford base serves as a training ground for all the R6 operators, and we can see this in the Hammer and Scalpel cinematic with Dokkaebi and Thatcher. However, in the old version of Siege, there used to be a situation and terrorist hunt on Old Hereford base, suggesting that the White Masks controlled the Hereford base at one point. Okay, but why would the Oregon group want control of multiple locations? This could suggest that the ED date was not a mark for the apocalypse, but to instead take over the Hereford base as a holdout for the White Masks in order to enable their plans for attacks similar to that in Article 5, but in other locations around the globe. Now, we don't know the date that's frozen in time in Oregon. However, we know that they had a goal to make it 87 days into the future without attracting law enforcement, which we can see on the garage in front of the building. I believe that the group on this map had plans to establish a large global network to ensure stability in carrying out their plans in England and potentially Germany with the German police uniforms. That way, if they went 87 days without being busted, they would be able to claim the Hereford base as their own, and establish a backup headquarters to use if the Oregon base was ever compromised. However, we know that the group never reached the day of their plan, as most likely the law enforcement was tipped off like in the Waco siege and sieged the Oregon farm before the group was able to make bigger moves. We can assume that the Oregon group was aware of the incoming siege because in both versions of Oregon, the table on the stage in the meeting hall is flipped on its side to be used as cover, with the text "Remember Us" on the front of it, conveying that they do not plan on surviving the attack. This is a clear reference to the holdout of the Davidians during the Waco siege. Along with this similarity, we can see other common elements between the Oregon group's practices and the Branch Davidians from the Carmel Center. Because in the kids' bedroom on the second story of Oregon, we can discern that the group had kids that were most likely being raised within the group's extreme beliefs. In the classroom on Oregon, there are 2 drawings on the wall that describe how the kids in the Oregon group were being raised as soldiers, similar to the army of God that David Koresh was attempting to make. On one of the drawings, we can see cursive text that reads, "Good guys," and is oddly spelled backwards. This contains a drawing of a devilish stick figure wielding 2 guns and what would seem like a monstrous form to a child. I think this most likely points towards the children of the Oregon group being raised with the belief that the police or operators are evil and want to destroy/ruin their lives. We can see another drawing next to this one of two stick figures aiming down pistols, both stick figures being labeled as Jacob and Mom. This shows that the kid's mom and possibly older siblings were being trained to wield weapons in case of an attack from the police. This goes to show how similar the Oregon group is to the Davidians, as both groups were avid in training all their members to wield weapons in case their enemies threatened their sanctuary. We can see other similarities to the group's ideologies if you look at the posters around the map. For example, there's a poster of a girl that reads, "Not my ancestor," which would explain a disposition to the theory of evolution, as religious teachings suggest that all humans were made by God. Another poster we see is "Protect Your Land," which directly references the heavily armed defenses from the Davidians shown during the Waco siege. Another poster is the White House being described as tyrants, which seems to hint at both groups' distaste towards the federal government, and them being an issue in their plans. After a closer examination of Oregon, it's clear that Ubisoft took a lot of inspiration from the real-life events at the Mount Carmel Center in the making of this map. From both of the group's ideals to the geographic similarities, it's quite impressive how dedicated the developers were to making this story a direct translation into Siege's story via a map. While the status of the map's rework and real-life backstory remain very controversial, my opinion is grounded in the idea that I find Oregon to be a very cool and well-designed map. It's very obvious when you slow down and notice the attention to detail on this map that a lot of time and passion went into its design. It's one of the last maps that still give me the feeling of old Siege. To me, it's a similar vibe I would get on Old House, but that's probably because it's the last map based on a house and ranked at the moment. The end of the Branch Davidians is one of immense unnecessary suffering. However, it goes to show that although Siege is a fun game, the real-life counterpart to Siege is one of a very serious matter of human lives and well-being. In a weird way, the Branch Davidians achieved their goal of surviving the test of time, as their home and actions to retain freedom will forever live on digitally inside Rainbow Six Siege, kind of as a permanent reminder that testifies the unfair treatment and suffering of the Davidians during the Waco siege. Except for David Koresh, because he dated a 14-year-old. Once again, I would like to thank you, the viewer, and the picklers for making it to this point in the video. If you enjoyed this story or anything about this video, then supporting me with a like, comment, or a sub is the best way to let me know you want more. I'm at a point where I'm trying to find a form of content that's balanced between my enjoyment in making it and how well it's received by you guys. And I definitely had a lot of fun researching this one. So if you have any feedback, I would love for you to share it with me as I continue to figure out this YouTube thing. So for now, you can expect more Siege videos for the time being, and the upload schedule might be weird for a bit because I'm working on a bigger project at the moment, but I'll try to keep it roughly once a week with some gaps here and there. Anyways, thanks for watching, picklers. I hope you enjoyed listening to the video, and I'm forever grateful for all of the support. I have some links in the description like a Discord server and my Twitch channel, so go check those out if you want to support me further. Alrighty, I'm gonna go play the new season, so let's wrap this up. Thank you, picklers, from the bottom of my heart, and I will see the Pickle Army in the next one. Peace, picklers.
Okay. Bye.